What if the very breath you take could be the key to healing and transformation? Today on Sunday SoulDay, we welcome Gyovany, a breathwork facilitator, martial artist, and former Army combat medic. After battling anxiety, depression, and surviving suicide attempts, Gyovany found healing through breath and movement. Today, he combines breathwork, Tai Chi, dance, and martial arts to help others reconnect with their bodies, calm their nervous systems, and live with peace, joy, and alignment. Let's welcome him to the show. Welcome to Sunday SoulDay, Gyovany.
Thank you so much, Tia. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on and blessing the show. I'm so excited that the audience gets to know you a little bit more. And I thought we'd maybe start with, just your experience. You have such an incredible background. So I thought it'd be great to just give people a quick overview of your experience before we dive into some of the really cool things that you're doing now.
Yeah, definitely. What's the beginning portion of my life, born and raised in Connecticut, United States, and family background really is from half Colombian, half Ecuadorian. And it's been a wonderful experience because it's, in a way, best of both worlds. I've learned English and Spanish, and even culture-wise, that I was really experienced with, which is very, very beautiful. And throughout my years, really, I've got into computer programming, which has been at a very early age. One of those things that I was like, how is that mouse moving from one end to the other on the monitor? And I just fell in love with that and stuck with it. And so I became an IT consultant, IT admin for about 17, actually almost 20 years now. I mean, we're really losing count. That was very, very wonderful because it really was my passion, my love. It was like what I eat, breathe, slept with, and I loved it. And throughout those courses, I got into the military as a combat medic, and that was a complete change, like 180. Felt like learning a new language, going from technology into the art of medicine and the body anatomy and all these kinds of words that I was just like, what is this? Am I going to pass this class? And it was great though, because there was that passion that I've had of wanting to help people, whether it was through technology, teaching them the new things. And then when I moved into the combat medic, it was really about health. And then from there, it really transitioned to breath work, where it was very, very helpful with what I was going through because of the hardworking lifestyle of corporate life. Even though it was 40 hours, so to speak, it turned into 60, 80 really quick. And so it was very, very time consuming. And it was a bit difficult at the beginning because it was like, this is what I love, but it felt like it wasn't sustainable anymore. And so that's why one of the reasons why I got into the military, even though that's another extreme. I was like, maybe I could help people out. And so that was, of course, too much for me. And I just went back into IT. Once I started going through one burnout after another, I was just like really not enjoying it. And so from there, I really found breath work. A friend of mine introduced me to these breathing arts, and I didn't know anything about it. And her invitation was just come and breathe. That's all you got
Yeah.
to do. Lay down and breathe. And I'm like, okay. And so that's after the first session, it literally changed my life, my insight, my perspective. I even cried. It was just very, very beautiful, very profound that I even said to myself, I want to teach this. And that's what also began the journey of the breath work.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for giving us that color. And I want to touch on that before we dive into the breath work and all the great things that you're doing with that. Like, I want to touch on, just first and foremost, you lived in such kind of like intense environments, right? From combat zones to the corporate pressures, like to your own personal kind of struggles, battling anxiety, like your identity, as well as, just probably burnout, right? I think you'd mentioned
Mhm.
that. So it's like, when did you realize, that you were experiencing that? Like, what did that feel like for you?
I would say that it felt like a, a sense of suffocation, really.
Hmm.
um
So
because
good.
after the burnouts, I would wake up the next day, I'm like, man, I got to do this again. And I would wake up at 3 4 in the morning, my heart is beating fast, My appetite is off the charts, whether I feel very hungry or very full. And so that was starting to become detrimental. You even get the circles in the eyes. And of course, I would do some, therapy sessions here, seek some help there. And they always gave me that sense of relief. But it was never lasting. Yeah, it wasn't very, very lasting. And especially when the height of my anxiety, I would say too, was probably in high school, college, when there was just so much determination from the family of having to live a certain way of life. And so if I deviated, it created havoc. And so that even was like putting pressure on myself, feeling that pressure from them. And that added to the whole anxiety part, where then I started to have these suicidal thoughts and suicide attempts, harming myself. And so that was just another realm of my life where I was just like, where's my life going to? And so I even started trying plant medicines, like ayahuasca. I even went into Kundalini yoga, which has very powerful breathing techniques. I mean, very powerful. I thought I was really going for yoga when they said you should try this, but man, that is powerful stuff. But what was great about these two, the plant medicines and even the breathing from the Kundalini yoga, was it started to help me realize stuff about me. Where am I getting this from? Where do I want to go? And so what was beautiful is that it started for me to release those stagnant energies or release the emotions, because I started realizing I was holding on to them. I guess that's why I was getting the tight neck or the headaches or the overthinking or overanalyzing. And it was creating havoc in my life, not only for work, but also in my social life. I wasn't going out as much. And if I did, everyone was like, hey, Gio, why are you so quiet? Is everything okay? And I just became like that fly on the wall. I would be the observer. And there was that point in time where I was like, no more, no more. There's something I have to be done.
My goodness, you gave me chills sharing. First of all, I'm going to do a little bit of a recap, but the when you talked about suffocating, like that feeling of suffocating, that is so well like described. And I think it's so important for the audience, who might
Mm,
be experiencing exactly what you were experiencing, right? They might be right in it, and they have no words to really describe it. So I love that you put some color to that because that's
mm,
really what it feels like, like it's the complete opposite of breath work, like it's
yes.
suffocating, like weighted feeling, and so I love that you touched on that. And then you touched on something else that I think is so profound. And, as a coach myself, I see this so often, where
Mm.
people are living for others and not for themselves. And there's
Oh,
so much
yes.
tension with that, like whether it starts when you're younger, and it typically does, and then you those stories, into your adult life, and then it affects every area of your life, like if you're using that kind of wheel of life, it affects every single area of your wheel of life.
Yes.
And you don't realize it because you've been practicing it for so long until you get to a point where you stop overthinking, stop overanalyzing, and you start wanting to live for you, you know? And so I love that you really touched on a lot of that. And, thank you so much for your vulnerability, sharing that, you were in a place where you were even harming yourself, because I think that's important for the audience to understand as well, like, and I've seen that too, and that comes in different forms,
Oh,
like
yes.
people can harm themselves, by overworking, overeating, not eating enough, being in,
Hmm.
toxic patterns. Like there's so many ways to harm yourself. Like I think we're just traditionally wired to believe that it's one way, like where you're, trying to end your life. But there's so many other ways that people harm themselves and don't quite recognize it. So thank you for calling that out.
Very, very welcome. I would say one turning point too is when I started to say to myself, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yes.
And that right there really was like, okay, what is it that I got to do?
Uh, it's like I think I wrote about this either on my social media post or in my newsletter, but I was like, you're get to a point where you're just sick of your own shit, like you're just sick of it, and your body's had enough, your mind has had enough, and your soul has had enough,
Hmm.
So. What was your, like, talk to me about that turning point, like what did that look like for you? Like when did you realize it? And then was it during that class? Was it a
Mhm.
little bit after?
I would say a little bit after, maybe even 6 months after.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Despite, of course, my family also having their concern and wanting to do something or help, and that was going on for years, it still wasn't that push. And I think that's important to know too, because help really comes from ourselves. There are many other people that can help us, but it really, really starts with ourselves. It can't happen any other way because it's a choice that has to come within. Because if I were to say yes, I'll do it because my dad said it, I can backlash it. It was like, you know what, you told me this and I don't like it, and that can really backlash. So I feel like it's really important that we do choose it for ourselves, because if not, it will backlash. And the first breath work was in the beginning of 2018,
Okay.
and it really changed my life. Different perspective. And so I was trying new things, trying to revamp my life, but it still wasn't that umph. And I would say by the end of 2018, I got to this lowest point of, I would say, depression, where I see people hanging out, no one's inviting me. What should I do? Even though those are perceptions. Um, I got in, I got into a life coach. There was a person that I was following for some time, and I resonated with everything that she was offering. And I was like, you know what? I've done this on my own. I've went to martial arts. I've done the military. I've done the breath work. I've done the ayahuasca. I went out to myself. Maybe I actually need some guidance. And so I was like, maybe let's try this out. And honestly, it was the best investment I could do. And right off the bat, she was like, okay, this is the message I'm getting after our intro call. And it's to stop the BS, stop BSing yourself. And I was like, whoa, she's getting really hard on me. Okay, let's do this. And it was a 90-day program. And I would say within halfway through, I was getting so fed up with my life that I don't know what happened, if it was an epiphany, a download, a feeling. I saw this vivid clarity vision that I wanted to quit my job, go to Bali to learn breath work for a few months, come back, move to Colorado because I fell in love with it, and teach in Colorado. And when I told her that, she was like, that's it. That's perfect. My job is done. Even though we have another half of this, I'm going to make sure you accomplish this, because you're going to get so many no's. You're going to get so many pushbacks. We're going to make sure you do this, because that insight you have is that deep calling. It just didn't just happen because you wrote it down. It was that whim of an instinct that just came up, and that's what we got to work on. And so from there, we did a vision board, we did due dates, and she was like, we're going to practice on this one, we're going to practice on the next one. And next thing you know, by early 2019, I had quit my job, sold everything, and moved myself to Bali. And I was like, oh my God, there's so many unknowns, but I love it. And so that's what got me to just pull the trigger, or what they would all even call the leap of faith. And that was very, very beautiful, because once I did that leap of faith, even more things opened up that I didn't even have to do. And I was like, where is this coming from? And it was beautiful, from finding the correct plane ticket, finding the best Airbnb in Bali, finding even more funds to help facilitate what I was going through. And it was just miraculous that I was just like, do you, and take that leap of faith, and the universe, God, whatnot, will just come to you. And not just in mystical angels, but it's like some person came to me with, wanted to help me out with some funds for the plane ticket. Or I even got, and it was funny because a round trip ticket at that time was only $700 from New York to Bali. And I was like, what is this? This is crazy. Where all the other dates were like 1,000. And so it was one of those things that I was very fortunate and blessed, and just didn't look back into taking leap of faith.
Oh, chills. I love this. Like, and I love that this is something that I think is a great takeaway for the audience is like you recognize that you couldn't do it on your own anymore, and you
Yeah.
need
Mm,
help. And that's even though I say like all the answers are inside of us, all the answers were inside of you, right? But what a great coach does is they hold a mirror up for you, but then they also shine a light so then you can see better.
oh, yes.
And
Yes.
so like, and that's really what, coaching is. And so it's not that a coach is like telling you what to do. They're guiding,
Mm,
and they're working with the answers that are coming through for you. And so I love that you touched on that, and I think that's such an important thing because I think a lot of times we go down these, rabbit holes where we just try and figure things out ourselves, but we only know what we know. And
Yes.
a lot of times it's so important to lean on someone else who can help guide us through, those kind of difficult decisions. So love that you took a leap of faith and just like stepped out on faith in yourself and more importantly that you listened, and I think like because you were in a lot more alignment with yourself, it
Mhm.
allowed you to listen, to, whether it was your higher power, whoever, you call your higher power, I call mine God, but whoever spoke to you, it's like you listened and then you went with it. And I think that's another important takeaway for the audience is like when you are in alignment, like so many beautiful things happen, and things that you can't even fathom, like
Mhm.
beautiful, I call them destiny helpers. You had a bunch of destiny helpers, to get you where you needed to go. And then also like probably provided you with things you didn't even know you needed or that you thought would come, so I
Exactly.
love that you shared that. That's so amazing. Like, so what was that like when you got to Bali, like, I mean, what was setting up and, getting people in, like, or I mean, because first you were learning, right?
Yes, definitely. It was a 1 month teacher training program.
Okay, amazing.
And I remember vividly my mentor, she asked me, did I get a one-way ticket or a round trip? And I was like, a round trip? You're kidding me? I'm afraid. Why am I going to do a one-way ticket? She's like, are you sure? Have you been to Bali? I was like, no, my first time. She's like, you're going to want a one-way ticket with Bali. I'm like, no, no, no. I need an emergency exit just in case. Because my family wasn't very supportive in the beginning of me going. So it was like, I'm not going to ask them for help if I run into issues and need to come back. No, I need to make my way back.
Unfamiliar. It's too unfamiliar to them,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's like you're going to Bali, are you crazy? Like, should be working, So,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh
Yes,
my
yes.
goodness. So
And
you were there
so
for about a month?
I planned for a 2 month so that way I can do the teacher training for that full month and then enjoy the island for the second month. But I kid you not, 3 weeks into the teacher training, I canceled my return ticket and actually stayed for 8 months.
Oh my goodness. Oh
So
my
it
goodness.
was wonderful. The 30-day teacher training, what's beautiful about teacher training is that and I appreciated the technique or the school that I went to because all of them are different. And this one in particular, literally the first 2 to 3 levels is about your traumas, about what you're dealing with. So we went through masculine energy, feminine energy, mother stuff, father stuff, breakup stuff, trauma stuff, and even childbirth stuff, and it was considered as a rebirthing process. And I loved it because they were preparing us that we got through our own stuff before leading somebody else, and that's what I really appreciated because after the pandemic too, there was a lot of breathwork certificates that were like a weekend long, and I'm like, no. And so this was very, very appreciative that it did take the time for us to deal with ourselves to see where we're at and if we were even capable from there to then go ahead and facilitate, where we started to learn how to do one-on-ones, groups, and it was beautiful. What I loved about it is, as well, is that we did 30 days of breath work each day, and then there was 2 sessions where we did underwater breath work, where I found it to be, you're with a snorkel, by the way, you're not just breathing like a fish. And so with this, I found I actually fell in love with underwater breathing that more than on land, because you're really feeling weightless and it's very beautiful. And it's supposed to replicate in a way like a simulation of you being in the mother's womb. And it was very, very beautiful for me, very connected with my mom again and her energy and where I've came from and everything that came with that, because it was an emergency section, which related to why I love to do things at the last moment, because I love the emergency mode in the IT world. And I did my best when I was like, go, 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 go. And that related to the emergency C-section that my mom had. And I was like, whoa, okay. So I started to connect the dots backwards. And so even my breathwork sessions, we talk about how was the birth, how was the labor, how was the all that stuff, because in a way it still affects us to this day if we weren't, aware of it.
Yeah, it's so true. I love that you mentioned that, and I've never done that, but now you just added something to my bucket list. I'm definitely putting that on there. That's so cool. I would have never even thought to do it in the water. And
Hmm.
that simulation, of being back in the womb, that's so beautiful because I don't think a lot of people don't understand that like our trauma actually starts then.
Yes.
Start because you're carrying not just, the trauma that your mother has, right? But then also the generational trauma that she hasn't healed. And so all of that is a part of you until you
Hmm.
either break those curses, or trauma, whatever words you want to use. But it's so important, that people become aware of that, like, and I love that you tied that back, like I've been doing a lot of healing work for the last like gosh, maybe a decade. And so like a large part of my healing was looking at that, like
Mm.
my mom was very young when she had me, like I think like 17 years old, and so
Mm.
you can imagine all the trauma that came along with that, and also probably shame, like from being pregnant, having to leave her high school because back then they put you in like, a school like something was wrong with you.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so it's so interesting. Like I love that you talked about that, and what an amazing program because I've seen so many breathwork programs that, happen within such a short amount of time, like you said, a weekend, and some maybe like a couple of weeks long, but that's such a gift to be able to spend time, to focus in on yourself, work on your healing, and like deepen your understanding of where you are so then you can better serve. So beautiful.
Yes, definitely, definitely so. It's such a profound practice, really. I mean, breath. Who knew?
I
After I
know.
did drinking of ayahuascas or bending my body in Kundalini, going through the military, learning that way, I was like, oh, I could just lay down and breathe, and I could just release it.
Amazing. Well, now
Yes,
you're
yes.
guiding others through breath work and movement as healing tools. Talk to me a little bit about that process because you have a lot of coaches, right, that
Mhm.
go through coaching programs and a lot of them actually watch the show and then they're like working on building their business, you know. Like what
Yes.
did that look like for you, that journey?
Ooh. Um, yeah. There's a lot of moving parts from social media to websites to taxes, and then because it's all that is important. I could say that because I even stayed in Bali for 7 more months, what was helpful was everyone else that was, you could say, in the same boat. And so I think what is important is to find like-minded people that are going through that for support, because it can be very overwhelming. It really can, because there's a lot of paperwork here, a lot of setup there, and then setup fees here. And it's like, what do I start with? Because some people may not have enough funds to do the startups, and some do, but there are some ways to go around it. And having that support system or other people in co-working areas is really, really helpful. And then the second part is just go out and do it, as I like usually say, because there's going to be a lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
And, without that, you won't know what works, what doesn't. Especially in the beginning, I've had classes where no one showed up. And so I just did the breath work myself. I was like, you know what? That's fine. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to use this my time for me and just work on that. And then through consistency on not just marketing, but wherever I went, I signed up for networking events that had nothing to do with mindfulness. Some were like about tech or cryptocurrency or marketing. And you would be amazed that no matter if there's a specific theme for networking, everybody shows up. And so it's wonderful to meet all these wonderful people. And then they're like, oh, you do breath work and you're in IT? Whoa. So it definitely gets going. And another tidbit that I ended up finding out was, uh, whether to bring in people through marketing ads like Instagram or Facebook ads, or networking events, face to face contact. I actually got more people coming to my classes from networking events than from the ads. To know you face to face contact, that they were like, man, I want to go and try this. And so that worked out more for me. And it's wonderful to try everything, because I like to say, test this, test that, and go from there. Because for others, maybe it works, the ads, who knows, but you won't know until you try it.
No, I love that you call that out because I think that is the biggest challenge with a lot of coaches that are building their business, and they're trying to maybe emulate what one coach that has made it has done. And it's really important to try a lot of different things, because what works for that coach or this other coach over here might not work for your business, and it might take you like traveling down a different path in order to get, similar results. And it might take you 3 times as longer or shorter, it all depends. And so like one thing that I love doing is failing. And so I'm like, I don't have any issues with not doing something right. Like I will try it. And if it doesn't work, I pivot. And I think that
Mm,
comes from, and you probably feel similarly, but it's like, I think it comes from that fast-paced environment, like working in tech. I spent a lot of years scaling early and growth stage startups, and you don't always get it right, like, and you have to pivot quickly when you get it wrong. And so
yes.
been able to kind of use that same energy, and mindset as I'm building my business. But I love that you mentioned that. Um, I have a question about this, because I'm like, this is a little bit opposite, but similar. It's like, what did it take for you to trust yourself? Like I would say like your own body, like, after experiencing the emotional trauma that you had, some of the physical things, like what did it take for you to trust yourself? Like, do you still doubt yourself?
Hmm. Mm. I feel doubt is healthy. There's always a healthy dosage of it. That's just like there's a healthy cholesterol and a bad one. you know, because at the same time, even questioning is healthy. I think the line is that if we overdo it or we overanalyze and get stuck on it, and then the dwelling happens, and then you're not moving, that's when the real issue of doubting happens. And so I know that I've gotten better with catching myself and asking myself, am I doubting it? Do I want it this way or that way? And then the one question I look for, or the feeling that I look for after I ask, is, does this feel light on my body, or am I kind of feeling heavy in resistance? So that's one thing I started to practice on, because it was like my body or my intuition or my spirit knew best for me, and it started to trust into that. But before I even got into that, was there was a point in time where my back was against the wall. And I knew that if I left my corporate job, which was my safety net, put myself in an environment that I had to step up, that's what I decided to do. And I know that people would probably get cold feet, you know, but it's imperative. At least for me, I'm very grateful that I did that, because I don't know where I would be if I didn't actually purposely put myself back to the wall. And it's like, okay, it's either do or die type of thing. You can't go back and not show yourself for it, because you at least with what the way I did it too was explaining to my family, I'm going to be doing this, everything's going to be fine, and yada yada yada. But then if I came back broke and nothing happened, man, that's not going to be a good conversation coming back home. So I had that in my head that helped me push even further, and so I feel that that's important.
Oh, I love that you talked about the healthy doubt. Like, I think that is such a gem. That's a gem. If you guys are writing it down, tweet that out, because it's so true. Like, and I think a lot of times people get stuck there because they think, oh, if
Mm,
I'm doubting myself, like I'm not doing something well, and then it's like this vicious cycle, and then they get stuck, in
mm,
that cycle, and then sometimes they quit. They don't keep moving forward, and I think that doubt is like it's healthy, but also like necessary. Wouldn't you
yeah.
agree? Like, I think it's necessary for you to question, for you to, I call it the pomegranate effect, like where you're like peeling back a pomegranate to get to the sweet spot. Like that doubt is all the outer layer of the pomegranate, to get to the
Yes.
sweet spot. So love that. That is so good. I'm like, I'm gonna remember that when I'm coaching. That's so good. Well, you blend like martial arts,
Mm.
Tai Chi and dance practice, like, or dancing, excuse me, into your practice. Like, how do these disciplines reflect your, kind of internal healing and transformation? And how do you incorporate them in your coaching?
Yeah, so great question, because martial arts itself, I actually started when I was a little kid, about 5 years old.
Wow.
I did started with Taekwondo here in Connecticut. And then when I moved down to Miami for college, And I had to pay for martial arts myself now. Taekwondo
Oh,
was over my budget.
very expensive.
And so I was looking for other martial arts. I was like, let me try it out. And then I ran into Kung Fu back in 2005. And it was way under my budget. And I'm like, perfect, I'll do this. And I ended up loving it. And so I did Kung Fu, Tai Chi, and Qigong. And that helped me out even with my mood swings, getting back into discipline. And there was something in me too that I always loved everything that was Asian, from sushi, from the characters. I would even put, Chinese stickers on my car and stuff like, like Fast and the Furious type of thing. But it was always related to like the Japanese culture, which I loved, like the samurai and Ninja Turtles. And so that's why I always fell in love with the Kung Fu and Tai Chi. But what I started seeing was the benefit that it was giving me when I was running into trouble with my anxiety or the depression. My girlfriend broke up with me at that time, this and that, life. And then I found a way that I could incorporate this with the breath work, because breath work is a laying down approach, or at least the technique that I learned. And it's beautiful. And what I've also learned, that movement helps with moving that stagnant energy in our bodies, because we tend to be stiff, even subconsciously, when we're going through anxiety, stress, especially around here. This really gets tightened up. And so I started doing warm-up movements for the shoulders, for the neck, because when we're breathing and when we go to lay down to breathe, most of the people that I've encountered would have shallow breathing or tightness on the upper chest. And in my breath work, we really breathe up into the chest area. So it's not really belly breathing, we breathe it up. So a lot of people get difficulty with that at the beginning. So we do a lot of beautiful movements to really open up and warm up the body that way. And I find it to be very, very beautiful. And when it comes to dancing, that actually was probably the later part. I started incorporating that, I would say, in the last year.
Oh, good.
Um, yes, yes, it was really, really good, because it wasn't until, I would say, I went to a Dr. Joe Dispenza conference back in 2022, and he would talk about tapping into your feelings and not just visualizing it, but getting into that feeling mode. And so I really related that to goosebumps when something wonderful happened, or I hear a beautiful song and it reminded me of my prom dance and it was how beautiful it was. And I would start getting these feelings in my physical sensations. So I started to wonder how I can bring that kind of feeling, tap into that feeling, into the breath work. Because Kung Fu and Tai Chi can be very slow.
Yeah.
Breath work, you're laying down. And I'm like, man, I think dance is great. And I love to dance, from my Colombian, Ecuadorian culture, from salsa and merengue. I mean, that was like in our blood. Like we grew up like that. And so I found it to be wonderful when I started using it in the beginning of the class, because it helps everyone to kind of distinguish from what's out there to, let's be in the present moment. Let's just shake it out. Let's let go of what's ever in the mind, and let's just drop into the class. And then we'll go into the breath. And that helps to tap into that feeling of what is it that I want to accomplish in my life. And it's been very, very helpful, to be honest. When you go what I like to call the crawling, walking, and run phase. So we start off with a nice little meditation, which would be the crawling phase. Then the walking phase would be the Tai Chi movements. And then the running phase, where we'd be dancing. And then they feel it. And then at the end, we'll go and lay down to integrate it all. And it's just a beautiful combination to really open up to ourselves to something new, whether it's to release that anxiety that we're holding on to, or I love to even look at it as how we can expand our lives. Because it's not only about healing, it's also about how can we expand it? How can we tap into our creativity to really make this experience into a joyful one? Not just releasing the trauma, because there's tears that do come up, emotions that do come up, and they should, if it does. And there's others that really just start laughing, start jumping up in joy, and that's beautiful as well. It's part of that process. And I find it to be very beautiful to combine it all.
Oh my gosh, I love that you're combining all of this. Like that is so, I mean, it's so rare that you hear about that, that people are combining all of these different practices. And that's what really makes, what you're doing so powerful. I could not stress that enough. Like, I even coach around this, like during the day, it's like you have to move that energy, throughout your body. Like, whether you get up and you go for a walk, you get up, you run up the stairs, you jump up, you do something to shift that energy. And I think a lot of times we get so comfortable in that energy that we don't shift it. It just stays there. And then we allow it to stay there and linger and then just fester, you know? And
Yes.
so I love that you're starting that, like with incorporating the dance, because that movement alone, in addition to all the other things that you're doing, is so powerful, just moving that energy around. And I love that you use the crawl, walk, and run. Like that's so good because I can totally see it as you're going through your class, like just
Mhm.
how powerful that is. I want to take a class now. Like, that's so cool. And I love that you even talk about how it's not always about healing. And I think that's where we get tripped up a little bit because
Mhm.
always, looking for the healing, but sometimes it's also just getting to more rooted in your body,
Yes.
to understand the emotions. Because in order to heal, you have to first understand it.
Yes. Definitely so.
Yeah.
Definitely so. And I feel like the understanding really comes in the integration period,
Yeah.
which is after the class or after the session or after the ceremony. Because, I mean, in my experience, when I would go through either that ayahuasca ceremony, which was been mind-blowing experience, or breath work, which I cried and let go of that trauma, and I would feel great for like the following 2 weeks. Then after that, I'm like, I'm feeling sad again, or I'm going back to my old conditioning or my limiting beliefs. Like, why? And I would go back to class and I would feel great again. And then 2 weeks later, I'm back down. And I go to the class and I was like, what is it that I'm missing here? And so it was the integration, how I can use what I understood in class, like maybe that aha moment or that clarity. How can I use that feeling and apply it to my everyday life on a consistent basis? And that was like the missing piece. Now, granted, you can't get to the integration portion until you do the first part. There's no skipping that.
Oh, no, it's part of the transformation period. Yes,
Yes. And
absolutely.
like you mentioned, the whole understanding part. So the understanding comes into the integration. Then after that, it's like, okay, now how can I apply that understanding? And especially day to day. And I ran into actually getting hard on myself by like, oh, I'm slipping up again. I need to be consistent. But I have to understand too, I'm still a human. Mistakes happen. I might slip up, but then I'll get back to it. But I know that if I continue to get back to it, it becomes a habit. And then after that habit, it becomes nature. And then it just becomes part of me. And that is actually the same formula that my trauma used, which was over and over again having that thought, or my parents saying no, or you shouldn't be dancing because of the XYZ reasons. And then I became so shy about it. And they're like, no, I want to dance. I want to be free. And then it's like, that's the same formula. So if we can invert that and use it for something positive, we can really change our lives that way. And so I feel like integration is very, very powerful and it's very needed.
Absolutely. And I love that you touched on giving yourself grace because I think that's another thing too. Like we are
Mm,
human. We are going to slip back up. We're going to like, trip back up into old habits even, but the greatest thing is that you know more than you did before. And so you know how to get back to faster, you know.
yes,
So
definitely.
love that you touched on that. Well, as someone, who has operated in survival mode for a while, and I'm the same. So we share that in common. How do you fuel yourself up now, mind, body, and soul, outside of breath work? Like, how do you stay in alignment to be able to keep your energy up and serve?
Oof, that's really good. Constant education, because I feel like it's very similar to when you go work out. If you work out that same muscle, it's going to get used to it and nothing else is going to happen. And so I look for, especially my morning routines, I mix it up between either I'm doing a meditation at home, I go for a run, I do a Qigong practice, or I even read a book. Something different, because each morning that I wake up from between 5 to 6 a.m., I was like, oh, I got to go for another run. No, let me switch it up again so I don't have to like feel weird about it, you know? But I do know myself, though, after so many practices, that I'm going to feel great afterwards. So whatever excuse my mind is going to tell me, great. But I know that after I'm doing it, I'm going to feel great after that. But what's also important for me is the continuing education about mindfulness, about breathing. And the most recent one that I've been into is the characteristics of avoiding attachments, anxious attachments, and secure. And that came up more and more in my relationship with my girlfriend. And so it's just like, whoa, what is this? I got to read up on this,
Yeah.
you know? And so that is essential. And I honestly feel like it's beautiful that we do continuous education because it's a never ending learning process. Granted, I don't want people to think too that, oh, it's if it's never ending, when am I going to? No, it's more of like you get to that moment where you're at the mountain peak and it's beautiful, it's great, and you can stay there and be there for as long as you want. But then there's times where life is like, you know what, let's try something different. Well, if you want something different, you got to come down that mountain and something's going to happen. And so guess what, you'll climb back up and you'll just do that routine over and over again. And that's what I love about life. And so as long as I continue doing that education, it becomes immenseful for me.
Yes, I love that you mix it up. Like that is so so important. And I could not agree more. Like I see myself as both a student and a teacher. And in order for me to share the knowledge, because I think like it's so great to apply it to ourselves, but like I live my life in full service. And so I believe that, God put me on earth here to do that and to really be able to take a lot of concepts, because I can take a lot of information and then be able to share it and, you know, um, share it in a way that people can grasp it quickly. I
Yeah.
think the superpower of mine. And so I love that you touched on that, and I can't stress that enough, to people is like tapping into your curiosity. And that's really what it is for me. It's like I'm so curious about so many things and I'll just go down this, path and grab books and talk to people. Like I'm not afraid to talk to anyone. So I'm like, like I think it's so important to keep that kind of childlike curiosity, within yourself. Um,
Yes,
and
definitely.
and it really lights you up, like when you learn. I believe that. I believe it's like everything is energy, including that, like how we get our information. So I love that you're looking into the attachments, which is great, especially when you're in a relationship to understand that. Very important. I actually wrote about it in my newsletter, the Soul Feeler Journal. So uh,
Ah,
that
yes,
was that
yes.
was really fun for me. But something else you mentioned that I think is really lovely is also just keeping it interesting, for yourself. And I think a lot of times we get kind of stuck in these routines or these cycles.
Yes,
We forget that we hold the power to be able to make changes and do things however we choose for ourselves. And even if one day you're like, I don't want to maybe go on a run, but you give yourself grace and you do something else, like that's okay. So
correct. Yes, definitely so. And I even say stillness is still doing something, with yourself, even if I don't choose any of those and I want to just maybe use a recovery day, that is also movement, even half a step is progress. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yes, absolutely. And I love that's how you fill yourself up. I think we're all here to, really do four things, and it's like to love and to be loved, to discover our gifts and
Hmm.
to serve, share our
Yes,
gifts with the world. And I really do. Like I think we complicate as humans, we overcomplicate everything. But but I think that's really what we're here to do,
correct.
and it's so important. But you mentioned something about, climbing the mountain. And I love that you mentioned this because it reminds me of like this quote that I love by this lovely gentleman, Andre de Shields, I think is his name. But he said three things that have stuck with me forever. But he says, surround yourself with people whose eyes light up when they see you coming.
Mm,
It's like too slowly is the fastest way to get to where you want to be.
mm.
And the top of one mountain is the bottom of the next. So keep climbing.
Oof,
Isn't that
beautiful.
so good? I'm like,
Yes.
oh, it's like I will never forget that quote. Like it just sticks with me for that reason. So when you mentioned the mountain, I was like, just thought of him instantly. But oh
Oh,
my
it's
God.
powerful. Yes, definitely so.
Yeah.
I was going to add one more thing that I was just thinking about because knowing that I use these techniques to fuel myself, all these new other things and modalities. One of the last things I would say that was hard for me at first, but it was the last thing that I started incorporating is really reaching out for support. Because even though I did the mentorships, I'm not in there anymore, but we are not alone in this. And it's imperative that we actually reach out to someone, even if it's just to voice it out and they're just listening, is super, super helpful. Because day to day, we're doing this and we may feel alone. Even the mind may get that in the way. But having someone to talk to is imperative, very, very imperative as part of the process. Because even for me as a Leo from the astrology, I'm very hard at asking for help. Like, I'm doing this by myself. I'm going to figure it out. XYZ, I wouldn't even read a book. But it's helpful to even voice it out. I feel like we get our all our pods in one line when we're voicing that out and really getting feedback or not, but it's important.
Yeah, I think that feedback loop is so important. It's something I continue to struggle with, but I'm constantly working at it. And it's, I think a large part of it is like I have always done things on my own, like
Mm,
even as a child, like navigating traumas, healing myself, like everything has been on my own, and don't get me wrong, like there's been, destiny helpers throughout the process, but for the most part, like I trust myself so much, you know, because I've been in like environments where I had to sink or swim, and I
yeah.
always will choose to swim, So, so it's like I always bet on myself, I trust myself, and I can rely very heavily on myself. But I
Mm,
realize like when you're building, like how we're both building, like you need community, like you need people
yes.
to help you do that, And so that's something that I'm widening daily.
Yeah,
So
no, definitely.
it's
And
so
it's
important.
really human nature that we want to be heard. We want to be understood. And sometimes especially in this day and age, it can be difficult. And
Mhm.
so finding that community is important, or what some of us in Bali would say, we find our tribe, you know?
Yeah, soul
Uh,
tribe. I love
yeah, yes, yes.
it. No, it's so true. Like, okay, well, let's talk about that just briefly because people who struggle with this, like me and like even you yourself struggled with this. Like, how do you start that process? Like give someone some advice around that?
Of finding your tribe?
Yeah.
Ah, networking events. I think that helps, like really putting yourself out there,
Mhm.
because once again, it goes back into the trial and error.
Yeah.
But not only that, but working on yourself, because you will attract the level of frequency that you're in. So if you're always negative, you're going to attract negative people. And I only say this because of my own experience.
Yeah.
And one that's still
And it's the
ingrained.
truth.
Yes. The one that's still ingrained are my past relationships, my romantic relationships, where I was like, why do I keep running into these kinds of ways? I was like, oh, I'm doing that too. Okay, well, I got to look at myself and where can I do that? So I think it's very important, A, is to work on ourselves so that we can change that energy. Because there was a moment in time that I just stopped going into relationships, stopped doing anything. I was like, okay, I'm constantly attracting this. So let me work on me. And then once I'm feeling good, I'll go back out there to see what else I can attract. But that's then the part two is going out there, whether it's a networking event, setting up your own shop. What I like to do a lot is meetups. The meetup.com online, those are fabulous. Whether it's an online thing, men's circles, women's circles, those help me a lot. Especially in the men's circles, we get to talk about everything that's just us about men and what we're going through. And I think that is also a great sense of community. And then you start one by one clicking with people. And I think that's very, very imperative to do, not only just to focus on yourself, but then to really go out there and see what works and what doesn't.
Yes, that is such great advice. I love the meetups too. And I think too, like even, like joining communities, like there's so many different types of online communities that also have in-person events. So, if you're a little gun shy to go in person, maybe start online so then you build up the rapport. And then, I did that as well. Like early on when I first kind of went on this journey, I knew I needed support. So I joined an entrepreneur community. And then, they had some in-person events. So I made sure I at least got to one of those as well. And I think that was just helpful just to get you out and also know that you're not alone. The same things that you're struggling with as an entrepreneur, like guess what? That person's struggling with, and even person who's been running their business for 10 years, they're also struggling with it. So I think that
Yes.
even that perspective, is so important, as you're getting out there. And then also just building relationships, that you trust. Like for me, that's a big thing is like I tend to trust first
Mhm.
and like whereas I think some people are more like, oh, I hold off my trust, and I'm completely opposite. I like I love full, I trust full, but then when you show me that you're not trustworthy, then I pull,
Uh, yeah, yeah,
and I do that pretty quickly. So I think that has always served me, as opposed to being like more closed,
yeah,
so yeah,
exactly. Yeah. No,
yeah.
and what's great about these circles, I remember, and it never fails, where in these men's circles, everyone has their topic of discussion, and not everyone has a chance because sometimes it's a big group. But I know for a fact that if I don't bring up what's happening with me, I know somebody else will, and it never fails. And I'm like, oh, you're going through that too? Amazing. Not amazing type of thing, but it's like I'm not alone.
Exactly, but
I can
it's so
relate.
true. It's so true. And I think when we're either like we're building this business, we're, kind of in our tunnel, or if we're even suffering, like a lot of times we think we're just the only ones, and we're not.
Yeah.
It's a large part of why I wanted to do the show, to let people know that they're not alone. Maybe they can't afford coaching, but I have incredible people on like you, do topics myself and just be able to share, so people don't feel alone, and that they know that, like, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and I talk a large part about pain to purpose, and because
Mm,
we all have purpose in us. All our creator put gifts in all of us, and they're all
yes.
to be shared. Now, whether or not you tap into those goes back to your choice.
Oh,
So.
yes. The power of choice for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for coming on and blessing the show. For anyone who wants to take some of your classes, I know you're a bit of a digital nomad, but like where could they find you? Like how could they be a part of what you're doing?
Yes, definitely. Since because I've been traveling around so much, I did a lot of in person, especially in Bali and Japan. But definitely, I also do online classes. It's
Okay.
not a full breath work per se, where we're laying down for an hour. It's just a mixture of things. Only because when it comes to those 1 hour breath works, a lot of things can come up, trauma related, healing related, and so those are best in person. So what I do online is more of the qigong, the energy movements, breathing exercises, the dancing, anything that can be done sitting and standing up. And that's what I am doing now on a monthly, which my next one is going to be, I believe it's the 9th of July. And
Cool.
so they can definitely check out the links on my Instagram, where I usually keep all my online updates via the Instagram.
Okay, perfect. I'll be sure to link everything down below and send me information on that because I want to join. That's awesome.
Definitely. Will do. Yes. Thank you so much.
No, but thank you again for blessing the show. And everyone, as always, have an amazing Sunday.
Thank you so much. Have a great Sunday. Take care.